The intention tonight is I'm going to present a few projects in a little more detail than maybe usual, and followed by a question period. So I'm going to try and skip along as fast as I can. And so if there's anything of interest to you, ask me questions and I'll try and answer. Like I said, it's going to be a few projects. And my name is Raymond Moriyama, and I'm often introduced in foreign countries, especially in the United States, as the most obscure Canadian architect. So the background, I think I'll quickly tell you that I was born in Vancouver, and at age 4, really had a bad burn and nearly passed away. And at 4.5, while watching, well, because my father sort of placed a bed in a place so that I could keep contact with the outside world. And I watched this small construction, which was like a big palace to me, going on across the street. And once in a while, this young man, good-looking guy, with a pipe and a roll of drawing would appear on the site and place the drawing on a big rock right beside the construction. And all the men would gather, and every time he said something, everybody would nod and smile. And I thought, wow, everybody likes him. Yeah, I wonder who he is. And then he would sort of inhale on this pipe, and when he exhaled, this beautiful smoke went into the sky, and I said, boy, I'm going to be that man. But my burn was pretty intense, and my parents couldn't believe that anybody in Canada could fix me up, because I was like a stiff puppet. And so I went to live with my grandfather on my mother's side, and he was a mining executive, but better than that, he was a samurai, sort of a wonderful haiku writer, and he used to write all these poems that I used to think were absolutely marvelous. But he had this wonderful platform from which he wrote the poem. And one day he said, Junichi, and he used to call me Junichi, my Japanese name. He said, Junichi, come on out. And said, what do you see? And I said, well, there's a moon. He said, well, what shape is it? And I said, it's round. He said, is it perfectly round? Yes. Now, what do you see? So I started to describe all the rabbits and animals running around in the moon, and he listened quietly. He said, is it beautiful? I said, yes, it's really beautiful, with lots of animals living in it. And 2 nights later, he said, Junichi, come on out. Look at the moon again. 2 nights later, and I'm out there, and 5.5 years old, looking at this moon, and grandfather said, which is more beautiful, this moon or the moon you saw 2 nights ago? And trying to figure out, trying to find the answer. And before I could stumble a terrible answer, he said, Junichi, don't you think this is much more beautiful? And I had to agree that it was more beautiful. And he said, there's something about magical imperfection. You have to try and do something as perfect as you can. But when the results are in, as a human being, magical imperfection means maybe more. So, think about it. At age 9, I decided, in Vancouver, riding on the tram, watching the city change as we went along, that I'm going, there must be somebody thinking about cities as well as architecture. And I said, I'm going to be a urban designer as well. And so 2 major decisions was made. But earlier, when I was 8 years old, I watched my wife, who was at that time 5 going on to 6, perform the Japanese instrument, koto, and she tap danced. And she became my Shirley Temple, you see. And I told my father that night, at 8 years old, that I'm going to become an architect first, then marry Sachi. And my dad said, well, maybe, you're really young, so maybe you'll change your mind. And I really argued, apparently, and said, well, I'm going to marry her. And so he said, well, you're going to be either very consistent or very boring. And at age 12, as it was described earlier, the Japanese Canadians, and you may have read about it, 23,000 of us were branded enemy aliens, and we were all Canadians, and we were put into an internment camp. In fact, my father was sent to a POW. He was a prisoner of war in his own country, and which is a kind of a remarkable story to tell. So we were sent to a camp. My dad was sent to Petawawa and Angler in Ontario. And at that point, I was ready to walk into a gas chamber. I would have done it happily with a smile, because it was a disastrous sort of occasion. But then I felt, we just cannot sort of get beaten down into this kind of a situation. So I decided I'm going to take a bath in the river because at the same time, the community, and all of us prisoners, were taunting me because I had this bad burn, and saying, well, he's ugly, don't touch him, it's catchy and all that. So I started to go over this mountain to go for a bath in this ice-cold river. And then I built a platform so that I could see if people were coming. And after a while, that platform became a wonderful sort of start for a tree house, because the nature was so compelling and it was so beautiful. And so I started to build this tree house, which was described. So, and what I learned was, how to do things with limited amount of tools and limited amount of material, which really sort of carried me right through my whole life. The architecture practice, we started in 1958 as a lone practitioner, and it was really ridiculous because we had 2 children, 2 babies, and between my wife and I, we had a total sort of a savings of $392. And at that time, I thought that's enough to, to sort of carry on. And in 1970, after trying all kinds of things, I came to a conclusion that I could take on, partners and others without giving them too much headaches. So we became Moriyama and Technion. Now, our interest relates a lot to my life, and I felt the education is the foremost, that I should be interested in formal as well as unstructured education. Can you see? Oh. And the thing that was important, at that age, and I was 28, was to affirm life. If you cannot affirm life as an architect, don't do it. And bioremediation, using nature to fix man's disastrous sort of degradation, became of great interest to me. And in terms of planning, the balance of conservation and development became very important. So in terms of the humanity, civility was important to me, and diversity and equality, as well as inclusiveness of all people. So we used to use these criteria to determine whether we accept the job or not accept the job. And I guess in many ways we were crazy because if the criteria said, well, these people are only interested in doing a condo for Christians, we would just refuse the job. Now, I was telling some of the students earlier that we have an acronym, 3 L's, the operational process. And we always, when we get a project, we always go out and listen to what not only the clients is telling us, but the public. And so listen and learning from listening, and then having the people sort of ask us to take leadership in design. We just do not sort of take leadership by saying, oh yeah, I'm an architect, I know better than you do it. Because as architects, I always believe that we're pretty ignorant. The 5 Ps, Ted and I sort of developed this, and this is a process of analysis, and the 5 Ps fit in really well. 1, people. It's important to analyze who we are designing for. And we find that if we're designing a project, maybe even 2 blocks away, the people are different. And especially when we're designing projects in some other countries, we find that it's really important to sort of find out who they really are and who are we trying to sort of look after. Quite often we find that the client will tell us something, but it's contrary to public good. Then we talk to the client and sometimes turn the job down. But whenever we turn the job down, we give names of 3 architects we feel are capable of carrying on, and they could go and make their decision. The place, every place is different. Every project has a different kind of microclimatic condition, wind conditions, the sun angle, and and every site has a different underground situation. It could be an earthquake zone, it could be a contaminated soil, and the program that we're given quite often, we spend a lot of time analyzing the client's program. And sometimes it's too easy to accept a client says, well, we want to build a condo for, such and such class of people. Maybe that's why we haven't done any condos at all, because there's not enough analysis given. The process of getting a design built is incredibly tough. And there are authorities that you have to go through, and all kinds of hoops and jumps and all kinds of economic situation. And by the way, economics is a very important factor, and don't poo-poo that. The most difficult one is the final one, the P for philosophy. This tends to be a little more abstract than even the word sounds. And this is where some projects get really sort of into a kind of a quagmire, and we spend a lot of time doing research. Now, I'll show you the first project I did, 1958. It was a private golf course in a man's backyard. The client was an amazing man. He was very busy, but he was imaginative, and he was inclined to listen to anybody with kind of an inclination to try something. But what we did as a process was, knowing that he was busy, I went out with him in the evening after he got back from work. And one night, we spent a whole night looking at his property. And we imagined where the moon is going to be, especially in August. And that's how we started to see the project realized. Now, this was a result. He was interested in Japanese architecture, but he asked me, not to just copy a Japanese architecture, but do something that's different. The second lucky stroke here was the landscape architect. He and I spent, almost virtually all night talking about the philosophy of how we integrate architecture and landscape architecture. And, where do the rocks go? The big rocks compared to smaller pebbles. And so we talked about, how does nature work? Like, when you look at a moraine, where do the big rocks go? And again, he and I used to talk all night and watch the sun come up. And we were also fortunate. We had a wonderful carpenter, a person who used to build ships in Newfoundland. And he was, such an amazing, salt of the earth kind of a person. And one time I drew a very complicated steel plate that was designed to accept the arch, sort of a glue-lamp beam as a bridge. And I gave it to him, and Fred James, this man, looked at it, just looked at it and said, Mr. Architect, that one corner is out by 1/8 of an inch. So I said, well, Fred, you're the expert, you do what you think is right. And he corrected it and had it made. And when these glue line beams came for the bridge, and we dropped it in, and went click, you know, it was perfect. So I always learn to listen to people, you know, especially good workmen. So we had a wonderful combination of 3 people, and we built this golf course in man's backyard. It's a 3-hole golf course, but with a combination of and permutation, we could, you know, get 9 different ways of playing this. And that's what we call the halfway house. And this is the view of what he sees from the living room window. 40 years later, he invited me to come and review the project. And it was a wonderful opportunity to look at your work, you know, 40 years later. And I found the project much more mellow, much more sort of settled, and it looked much better 40 years later than when it was first built. And it was done on only a few sets of drawings, and it was detailed right down to the last bolt. And to honor this carpenter who grew up in Newfoundland, we designed a boat that would sort of look as if it went nowhere, to pick up the golf balls in the pond. And 40 years later, it was really beautiful. The second project was a Japanese-Canadian Cultural Center. And this was really a challenge, because soon after the war, the community was really in a disastrous way. You know, and so we wanted to sort of give them a sense of stability, a sense of hope, and very few of us started this project, and this was the first concept, and this was the final result. We had $14 a square foot, so it was really a tight budget. And when we finished the project, it came in, you know, it calculated to $14.14. So, you know, I admitted to the client that we were over the budget. It was 1%, but it was over, and they really raked me over the coal for being 1% over. But I told them that, you know, that's fair. You know, we agreed to $14, and so, and we were saving money by not having a storm sewer. We were using the creek to run the rainwater. But more significant was the fact that it had to be a symbol to prop up the community. And the hallway, in the hall, I was quietly asking the people, the members of the community, you know, are they going to, you know, remain sort of a prisoner of what happened, or do they see a way of hope and future? And so these were symbolic things, and we had landscaping that look at the the whole project was growing out of Canadian soil, that we had to be proud to be Canadians. My wife and I had, in university, 3 dreams. One to do a city hall, second to do a new kind of a museum, and third to build a cathedral. Well, the first of the project, the civic center, was offered to us, and this was the site, and this was going to be the center of the Scarborough community. And we went through a lot of questioning and talking to a lot of people. And this is one of maybe 14, 15 models we built. And because Toronto does have a cold winter, it had to operate inside and outside. And so this is one function that was happening inside. The symphony sounds really wonderful in this hall. And these were some of the ideas for the outside in the summertime and future development. Up to about 2005, we worked with about 16 universities. And now our sons and 2 other partners are working on about 30 colleges. And I'm just going to show you one. This is York University that some of the Technion people from Canada would know. And we designed the entrance building. And well, we've been interested in computer since the early 70s. And so open space for computer. We try to make everybody feel sort of comfortable and safe in this place. Porosity was important. Lecture halls are pretty conventional, but how we put the rooms together was slightly unique, and this is a study area. We do work with corporate universities, and this one is Bank of Montreal Institute for Learning. And aside from having various facilities, what we tried to do was to encourage people working together. And one of the means was to create a wall that's used for rappelling. And well, as you know, in order to rappel, you need 3 people. Without the teamwork of 3 people, this person would be on her back. So, and planning-wise, I'll just quickly touch on it. We work in the States, and one of them is South Miami Beach redevelopment. And this was quite early in our career. And Niagara Falls and Wadi Hanifa in Saudi Arabia. This is South Miami Beach, and we were given over 200 acres of the south end of Miami Beach. We looked at it strictly from the money point of view. What's the economics? How do we get the most out of the buck? And strangely enough, I don't know how to operate this properly. What we found that gives the maximum for the buck was to carve up the land and take 20% for water and use it for water transportation, as well as providing a simple road pattern. The conventional wisdom is that, that doesn't make any sense, and we're still waiting for them to sort of decide what to do. But it would make Miami Beach South, much more interesting, and so we'll see. Niagara Falls for 57 kilometers between Lake Ontario and Lake Erie. We did a 100-year vision together with a 20-year vision, getting closer to the reality, and the 5-year action plan. How do you get from here to the 20 years? And we produced a report, and the Niagara Parks Commission is studying it. And so that's the 57 kilometers. We looked at Niagara Falls from 600 million years ago, and it was quite a different sort of a formation. The vegetation, everything was different, and then looked at the native population, what they were doing, and of course there was the big battle between the U.S. and the United States and Canada, and the Americans will not admit that we beat them. And what we tried to do was to make it worthy of the whole of Ontario by bringing all kinds of resources and people from various parts of Ontario. And these are some of the people that we interviewed. I think we interviewed well over 1,000 people. And this is part of the Niagara Falls. And one project that we were proposing is to take the elevator shaft that's already there and expanding on it and creating some underground sort of a facility using the best, the hard rock miner we have in the world, imported from Sudbury. Now, Wadi Hanifa, and I'll just touch on some of the problems and I'll give you the results later. I don't know if some of you know Riyadh and the desert condition there. Anybody? Well, the environmental degradation is just immense, and the bird population was totally sort of disappearing, and the current condition at the time, 10 years ago, was really horrible. The question that was posed to us was, give us a solution. So when I went to the meeting for the first time in Riyadh, I said, why would you hire an architect to solve your desert problem, especially an architect from Canada, a northern architect. And they said, well, they were very straight-faced, said, well, we figured that you'll give us an answer that we won't get here. And so it was a challenge. United Nations is so interested that we'll be making a presentation to them shortly. We've already gone to them once before. But let me talk about this project. Canadian Embassy in Tokyo. As you know, right now, the the Tokyo population is 34 million if you include Yokohama. And right in the middle of it is this imperial ground. And the Canadian Embassy property is right across the street. And this is the State House. And the emperor and the empress lived right there. Now, Canada had this brilliant concept, and that's to build a $200 million project at no cost to the Canadian taxpayer. And we were given that task. Well, at first, we thought that's ridiculous, but then when we started to think about it, the economy in Tokyo area was sort of just enormously sort of great. And our mandate was to create one of Canada's best embassies at zero cost to Canadian taxpayer. And the schedule we were given is 4.5 years. And without selling any part of the 4 acres that Canada had. Now, the question is, how do you solve this complex, economic and legal problem? And also to do an architecture that's symbolic, the enhancing Canada. Would you care to guess how much those 4 acres were worth in 1988? Anybody care to guess? $1 billion. $1 billion? Did somebody say too low? $3 billion? Well, you're coming close. It was worth $4 billion US. And so, there are a lot of sort of jokes going around, and I even said, why don't we sell it and reduce our deficit? But, the international diplomacy would just not work. So we started to look at the history, and the interesting part was Sir Herbert Martyr, who was the first sort of delegation to Japan, was in Japan in 1929. And I thought that's remarkable because that was the year I was born. And this was the front gate. And this is a statue of this man next door. and there was a peace memorial park right next door. Now, Canada issued this sort of, I guess, information that was unclassified, and said, okay, we're going to build this at no cost to the Canadian taxpayer, but we're not going to give up 1 square centimeter of land for open space. That really made our task immensely complicated, because every regulation that the Japanese had came tumbling out. The national regulation, the local, sort of a regional regulation, and the local. But I said, okay, I agree with this, because it's a security matter. But there were 2 big issues. Okay. First of all, this Peace Memorial Park, we were told you cannot change the insect count. So I went to the municipality and said, I think what you're telling us is that you don't want to change the ecology. And they said, that's right. And I said, I agree. We should be doing this more often in Canada as well as any place else in the world. And they put a monitor that calculated the number of insects on that piece of land. And that was a difficult one. But also difficult was that we had to build this building without casting a shadow beyond 10 meters of the imperial ground for no more than 2 hours a day. And that was any time of the year. So the winter became really a big issue because the sun angle is low. And we had quite a battle in Ottawa, back in Canada, because the Canadians were saying, well, that's stupid, this is our land, we can do anything we want. And I'm saying, look, you're building in Japan, and we should be, listening to all this. So it took me a while to convince that, to get them off their sort of a high horse and accept. But because they couldn't accept the idea, I made a model. Well, I'm sorry. The building had to fit within that box. And so that box made it sort of a little more convincing to Canadians what our task was. And of course, there was a monitor set up in the Peace Memorial Park next door. Now, we went through 50 somewhat sort of a configuration of design. And cutting it this way, cutting it that way. But one of the things that we did not want to do was to put the commercial facility, which was going to trigger and carry the cost of this whole project, out on the main street. Because then Canadian us will look like a bunch of money-grabbing people. And if we put the commercial facility at the back, it would give us zero, so very little income. So, how do we solve this complicated sort of economic problem? So we did several sort of models, and I think we did about 55 or so. And somebody said, why don't we do a treehouse? I said, hey. well, sounds like a wonderful idea. And it came from a lady, you know. And this was a model that Ted and a bunch of them made to kind of celebrate this idea. But the interesting thing that we found was that there's a flower arrangement that looked like this. And that triggered a lot of thoughts. So what we started to do was join Canadian metaphor and the Japanese metaphor together. And in Japanese, ten jin shi means heaven, people, earth. And in that fashion, well, what we tried to do was combine that with industrial, people, and earth. And so we were trying to pull the two thoughts together. By putting the commercial facility as a base, we would have the people's space on the 4th floor. Now, that allowed us to get the people level above the treetops across the street. And then the heaven will be the embassy. And we tilted it back, and the Japanese looked at it as a concept of enryo. And I don't know if some of you know what enryo means, to sort of hold back or lean back out of respect. So the Japanese loved the idea, and so we were on our way. So we had to fit it into that sort of a shaded area. The conceptual section was that, and then finally. And so on the 4th level, we did a cross-section from the Atlantic to the Pacific and to Japan as a garden. And to illustrate, we made this model. And this was the final model. So the people approaching the embassy will take a 4-level escalator going up. And so when you're up on top of the 4th level, I'm just showing the team that worked on this project, the Japanese team, our team, and the Canadian embassy team. Well, okay. The Japanese staff had this area behind the residence, and the ambassador would not allow us to tear that down unless we moved them into a very sort of not high class, but a good area, so that the ambassador was very interested in making sure that the Japanese staff would have an opportunity to send their children to a good school and be able to marry reasonably well. And so those were mandates given. So what we did was we spent considerable time finding residence for them. We moved them out, and instead of moving the embassy staff to an office building, which would have cost us more than if we were to build a new temporary embassy. And, you know, Ottawa people just couldn't believe that that made economic sense, but we just, you know, showed them numbers, and so we put up a temporary embassy there, and moved the people out of the old embassy into this. And then, while this is operating, we constructed this. And then we move the people back in here. And then once they're in here, we built the residence and the recreational facility. These were crude schedule that we used to use to. And we built full-size mock-up of the office area. And we had every staff member come and look at it, sit there, and whether it was raining or really a hot summer day, they sat there and evaluated. So we had good set of evaluation, and so in the end, you know, issues of security, earthquake, symbols, you know, the full-size mock-up and scale and costs were all calculated right down to the last nickel. And we started an on-time delivery type construction. And so, you know, the truck with a steel beam would arrive at 2:22. The crane would pick it up, put it into a place where it should be going. And there was no lost time. And the total management system was so clear that, you know, we learned a lot how to do it. But, you know, can we, you know, we couldn't get the Canadians to accept such a stringent and clear way of thinking. So everything went click, click, click. And every worker had a walkie-talkie. So the communication was absolutely gorgeous. And the workroom was amazing too. On one wall, there was information on Canada. On the other wall was the statement, and it was almost embarrassing that, you know, my concept will be written in Japanese, and so that everybody understood what the concept was. And the third wall had pamphlets encouraging people to visit. So, and the nearby street is like this, and we wanted to show how Canada is like this in the prairies. So we created this garden strictly out of stone. So there was absolutely no maintenance. And all these stones were carved out so that the load factor was virtually nil. And the cantilever was 14 meters. And this is the transition from Canada to symbolic to the Japanese section. And the theater was designed like a kabuki theater in the 17th century in the open air. And the sky was just covered with lights, and the stars that represented that sky was set for October 11, and my birthday. We had a marvelous lighting consultant, Japanese, and you could see that you know, there's no sort of a scalloping like the back wall here. So when it was finished, that's the embassy, the state guest house. And we were invited to the state guest house, and this is what the state sort of guests will see in the morning as they come out to the balcony. And they see the Canadian embassy as a heaven. A Korean prime minister said, oh yeah, there's Canada, representing our heaven. So we were able to achieve one of Canada's best embassies, and on budget, which was 0, and 4 days ahead of schedule. And what was remarkable experience for us was that we had not one change order on $200 million. Everything was sorted out, before. And it was an amazing experience for us. And more. Now, the visitation at the time was about 10,000 people per month. And young people used to come and have lunch on the 4th floor. And on open house, April 2001, we have over 20,000 people, which was remarkable for our embassy. But the best part was the English newspaper. Is it the Independent that says nothing good about contemporary architects and architecture? Gave us a glowing review. And the Japanese newspaper carried really lauding comments about how we respected the imperial household and so on. So we were soon shown as different from Americans. Saudi Arabia National Museum. Okay. This was a centennial project to celebrate the unification of Saudi Arabia. And it was an international design competition, and we were one of the most obscure people who were invited. And the essentials are, it was located centrally in Riyadh, 83 acres. And the competition included design of restoration of a palace, Darat, royal residences, mosque, Maidan, auditorium, library, etc. It was a full 83-acre project. And the budget was 700 million Saudi riyal. The client group was quite interesting. They started with apparently 86 international architects, and they trimmed it down and down, and it got to 10, and they visited every one of the 10 architects. And so in Toronto, they wanted to see the Battleship Museum, which we did, and the Ontario Science Center. And they were really interested in the museum in Sudbury. And in this particular case, when we received the project, there was a massive strike. The miners were on strike, and so, I said to the client, if I were a miner, I would just object to having people work on a museum. So I said, can we change the program? And we redesigned the project, and we invited the miners to bid on the job. And so the miners were absolutely marvelous, fantastic. They saved us over about 50% of the cost of excavation because they use gravity to work for them. They don't fight it. So the auditorium is a cavern, and as the water in the lake goes up and down, the water in front would go up and down, and water would come down the wall and so on. It's really a marvelous thing. So the Saudis really like this project. Now, the National Museum, Saudis never had a national museum, and so this was to be the first. Now, at the beginning, I said to the office people, we were one of the 4 invited to participate. I said, I don't know if I could work with the Arabs, and so everybody thought, well, I'm discriminating, and I said, well, maybe I should be open-minded and go to Saudi Arabia and see, and meet the client. So I did, and studied what they had and the history. And in fact, when we started the project, we bought about 30, well, maybe about 30 inches of books. Every book we could get our hands on, written in English, we bought and studied it. The Hajj. Well, but I wasn't really convinced until I said to the gang from Toronto, let's go out to the desert. Let's go out about 4 o'clock in the morning. So we did, and we watched the sun come up. And it was so beautiful. I said, Jude, I'm getting seduced. So what I concluded was the essence was for the individual Saudi. It was about the rich past and building their self-esteem. And for the kingdom, it's about the future and the building of nation based on Islamic faith. And so we concluded that if we are to compete, we would use the abundant, inexpensive sandstone. And we located 4 mines and it allowed us to do every facade from different companies so that all the material met at the corner so that one can't tell whether they were matching or not. And form growing out of the desert. And so we did a national vision that we thought applies to this project. And we were bold enough to give them a city vision of that would allow us to fit into this vision. And after we won the competition, the mandate came from the king saying, it's got to be completed in 30 months. 83 acres in 30 months. So we sat back and said, let's reorganize. And we took in architects from different countries who we thought were very good. And they said there's no extra funding. And the official date was set as January 22nd, 1999. What I discovered interesting was that the sunset in Riyadh and Mecca were almost at the same sort of a point. And so that started to set a direction. And our team was from Canada, England, Germany, and Saudi and French. And because they were Saudi and French, we had people from Montreal working on the contractor side. So we quickly reorganized, and we worked in one office together. And this is the west facade. And it was designed like a terrace at the same time to reduce the heat load on the west wall. But the wonderful thing happens at sunset. And it took us 2 years to convince the client that we should open the museum at night, not during the day when it's 50 degrees. And as the sun sets, people who are walking on the palace wall could see their shadow on the museum. And the museum wall becomes a shadow wall. And it turns crimson, and it really becomes quite amazingly beautiful. Well, this was a shot of our two sons and myself out on the desert celebrating the first day of the second 100 years. And we're having a good Cuban cigar in a Saudi tent that night. So we did achieve a world-class museum on time, 30 months, and $4 million US under budget. We were given accolades, which was quite wonderful. But let me just briefly take you through the Wadi. It's 124 kilometers, and it's over 4,000 square meters. The degradation that I talked about, it took about a year to clean up. And then we started to work out, like 134 bioremediation cells were designed and built. And this is a single cell. And planted about 45,000 sort of trees. And we brought back indigenous plants, which was really an important thing to do. And now the water is getting so clean that we were able to create 4 lakes, and for the first time, I think the water is almost drinkable. But the fish is back in, and what's amazing are the bird life that's come back. Oh, I dropped the G. Well, I'm going to try and take you through a bit of a process. The mandate was that the veterans wanted this place to open on May 8, 2005. The 60th anniversary of VE Day. They didn't want it changed at all, and that meant that we had to do it in 4.5 years. Well, on the first day, I said to the client body that the Canadian War Museum will not be beautiful. In fact, if people said it was beautiful, I failed to do my job. That the Canadian War Museum will bother people somatically, and it will also allow individuals to reach conclusion. We're not going to give them a conclusion. the influences for us was listening and learning, okay? I talked the client into myself and the Director General to travel across Canada to listen to what the Canadians are feeling about war and War Museum. And I said that if there's more than 10% dissident, I would drop the project. And I think Canada should drop the project. But it was an interesting thing, you know. Some of the major comments were, don't glorify war. Sounds very Canadian. Don't spend money, but make it great, you know. War is like going to the depths of hell to resurrect the soul. A statement that came from a woman. Impeccable architect will give up a part of his soul, you know, ego, and embrace the soul of the nation he serves. What is the soul of the Canadian War Museum? The Canadian landscape had a great influence, and we reviewed the shape of the land from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And the poems and images of war had a great impact on what we were doing. And I'm sure some of you know this statement, I died in hell. They call it Passchendaele. And you know, Sikfio Sassoon wrote this. And Passchendaele is a town that was totally destroyed. And this is what Passchendaele looked like at the end of bombing. But the interesting thing is nature did survive. You know, what man did, like building, nothing survived. But so it said a lot. And Carl Sandburg wrote Grass. And I'll let you read this. Grass became very important to me. You know, how do we achieve this? Artwork and artifacts of war in the collection, and there are art collection here that's now worth over $1 billion. And Ottawa, where the museum is our nation's capital, and the site is here, and the parliamentary precinct is here. The interesting thing is at equinox, the sun sets right straight up Ottawa River, and in the wintertime, the sun sets in the Quebec side and summer in Ontario. And this is what the site looked like. Wonderful site, but tremendous challenge. Flood condition was great. The soil was totally contaminated. Bedrock a few meters below grade. And this particular area is a earthquake zone. And ecological sort of consideration. Our economic aim was to do this particular project at 2/3 or less than the National Gallery or Museum of Man, which a lot of people thought was impossible, and intention was to express ordinary Canadians doing extraordinary deeds in extraordinary situation, in extraordinary times. The Canadians, we found during the journey, are really modest, but at the same time, very courageous. And that's what we wanted to express. And one day that Canadians all come together is Remembrance Day, especially at 11 a.m. and what we call 11-11-11. Some influences included, sound, and you'll see some of the way the building was designed. The philosophy was regeneration, and what we felt was, there's survival, rebirth, hybridization, and hope, and how do we express it? So the architectural concept, in the end, came down to a regenerative landscape. We never talked about architecture, and we didn't utter the word architecture throughout the whole project. We developed 64 optional designs. And the final 3 designs were taken to the maximum distance and put on a website for public comment. It was nationwide, and we thought we'll get more than this, but we had 1,200 inputs. Only 4% disagreed with having a war museum, so that put the project on the plus side. So the final resolution was this. Well, the foyer, we tried to make it like going to the depths of hell, but and the sound of Wagner was foremost in my mind, and the power of absence. The Hall of Remembrance is here, and the poster shows the narrow sort of wedge entry into that area. I don't have an image of that. And the Hall of Remembrance is right at the sort of intersection of these 2 axes. And some of you might be interested in knowing that this particular concrete, we have 15% fly ash. Not really to save money, but it did save us quite a bit of money. But I was trying to get this sort of a magical imperfection, and it seemed to be able to give us that. And on Remembrance Day at 11 o'clock, the shaft of light was supposed to shine right through the whole building and hit the original tombstone of the unknown soldier. But the question was, whether it was going to work. The first year, the sun didn't appear, so we couldn't test it. But next year, it did appear, and the national television was photographing it. So I was saying, wow, if it doesn't work, we're going to be a national disaster. But 11 o'clock, perfect. Commissioner's Walk, it's the tilted wall, we're using tank lights. And this is one museum that has no sign. It just has Morse code, which says MCG and CWM. And if you notice, you know, I told the contractor and the window installer that we want magical imperfection. So the light is shining in different angles. The window allows the difference. If it's constant, it gets a bit boring. The large artifact area, and it was designed with a swing band and jazz played in a hangar, so that was the sound. Okay, the last thing. I hope you're not totally sleepy. Regeneration Hall. Now, we took the back stair, emergency stair that we had to have, and we made it into an architectural exhibit reflecting hope that's still, you know, unfulfilled. And it's harking back to when I was 12 years old, building the treehouse. And I was always wondering, how does it feel to be inside a mountain and with the lights coming through? And the sound of wind. The sound of wind is what triggered the first design. It wasn't a visual thing. And this was a sketch of what I was experiencing in that internment camp as a boy, 12, going on to 13, on the side of this mountain. And what I'm trying to show is the Peace Tower in Ottawa is our symbol of peace. And this Regeneration Hall, which is designed as a wobbly structure. I'm sure that no structure engineer ever got a sort of an instruction to do a wobbly structure. And I wanted it to be wobbly, a one-point structure, and he succeeded. It was so well designed that when the parts came in, everything just click into just an amazing whole. And on the south side, it says, lest we forget, in English and French. And it's full of optical illusion. So if you come into this room and look through this glazing, the window, it focuses on this Peace Tower. And so we're trying to make that connection. And this figure is a figure of Allward's sculpture called Hope. It's one of those once-in-a-lifetime sunset. So, Canadian postage stamp. Now, if you're not totally asleep, I'll entertain questions.